All right, we're about to open up a prehistoric cold case file. Deep inside a Belgian cave, a discovery was made that forces us to look at our ancient relatives, the Neanderthals, in a whole new and kind of chilling light. It reveals a dark and way more complex side to their social lives than we ever really thought possible.
So, cannibals in our family tree? I know, it's a pretty provocative question, right? But it's one we absolutely have to ask. Because the evidence we're about to dig into suggests that for some Neanderthals, their own kind was on the menu. And here's the twist. It wasn't just about survival. It was something far more organized and, frankly, a lot more disturbing.
So let's just dive right in. The core finding from the Goyet cave in Belgium is, well, it's shocking. The remains found there don't point to starvation or some kind of symbolic funeral ritual. Nope, they point to a deliberate, selective, and violent hunt. We're basically about to piece together a prehistoric crime.
Okay, so our investigation has to start at the scene of the crime, right? We're talking about a cave that's held on to its secrets for more than 40,000 years. This is where the story of the Goyet Neanderthals really unfolds.
So we're in the Goyet caves in modern-day Belgium. Now, this site, it's a total treasure trove of Neanderthal history. Seriously, one of the most important spots in all of Northern Europe. But somewhere between 41 and 45,000 years ago, during the late Middle Paleolithic, this cave became the scene of something really, really brutal.
So, what kind of clues get left behind at a 40,000-year-old crime scene? Well, this is where we turn to the forensics, the silent testimony of the bones themselves.
The markings on the bones reveal a process that is just chillingly methodical. I mean, this was not some frenzied attack. First, the lower limbs were specifically selected. Then, the bodies were systematically dismembered. The meat was carefully stripped off, and finally, the bones were intentionally fractured to get to that rich marrow inside. This was a systematic butchering, and that process speaks volumes about what the perpetrators intended.
And this is the real kicker. This is the most crucial piece of evidence right here. When scientists compared the marks on the human bones to the animal bones found in the exact same cave, we're talking horse and deer, the treatment was identical. The same cut marks, the same fracture patterns. This wasn't a ritual. This was processing for food, plain and simple.
And if that wasn't enough, there's a final, pretty grim twist. Some of the human bones were actually turned into tools. They were used as what are called retouchers to sharpen their stone flakes, the cutting edges of their other implements. I mean, that detail just reinforces it. The bodies were treated entirely as a resource, the same common practice they used with animal remains.
Okay, so we've established the what and the how of this whole thing. But modern science lets us go a step further and ask a much more personal question. Who were these victims?
Using some pretty advanced genetic analysis on all those shattered remains, researchers were able to identify a minimum of 6 distinct individuals in this bone pile. And that's a huge step in understanding the scale of what actually happened here.
And this is where it gets really, really interesting. A clear profile starts to emerge. The victims were 4 adolescent or adult females, 1 child, and 1 infant. And get this, isotopic analysis, which looks at the chemical signatures in their bones, revealed they weren't from this area. They were outsiders.
So you might be asking, how many adult males were found among the victims? 0. The complete absence of adult men is a powerful and honestly a deeply unsettling clue.
You see, this kind of demographic breakdown just doesn't line up with a natural event, like a rock fall or a flash flood. A random tragedy would show a mix of ages and sexes. This profile, made up entirely of women and children, it strongly suggests they were specifically chosen. They were targeted.
So that leads to the crucial question, why? If these women and children were hunted, what was the motive behind this kind of organized violence?
Well, this behavior actually has a name, exo-cannibalism. And it's not about eating your own family members out of desperation. It's about consuming outsiders, and it's almost always linked to conflict between groups.
Researchers believe this act was likely driven by a bunch of overlapping pressures. We could be talking about territorial disputes, competition for scarce food and resources, or even a brutal strategy to weaken a rival group by eliminating its women and children, which would cripple their ability to reproduce and survive.
And we absolutely have to remember the context here. This didn't happen in a vacuum. The late Paleolithic was a time of intense pressure. The climate was unstable, Neanderthal populations were already in decline, and they were facing a brand new competitor, Homo sapiens, who were just beginning to arrive in neighboring parts of Europe. The pressure was definitely on.
The thing is, the grim events at Goyet weren't an isolated incident.
They're part of a larger and way more complicated pattern of Neanderthal behavior, a darker side of their history that we're only now really beginning to understand.
Evidence of Neanderthal cannibalism goes back much, much further. At the Moula Gersi cave in France, remains dating to about 100,000 years ago also show signs of butchering. This suggests that this type of behavior, though horrifying, was part of the Neanderthal story for a very, very long time.
Now, it's not always so clear-cut. At that older Moula Gersi site, there's still a debate going on. While the first theory pointed to nutritional cannibalism, just like at Goyet, some researchers now argue that subtle differences in the cut marks might suggest a ritual practice instead, maybe like stripping the flesh for a burial rite. It just shows you how complex interpreting this evidence can be.
But at Goyet, the evidence is so much clearer. And this quote from the research team really hits the nail on the head. It highlights a huge shift in our perspective. It forces us to see Neanderthal cannibalism not just as a last resort against starvation, but as a potential strategy, a calculated, violent act between groups.
So, what does this tell us about our ancient cousins? Savages, survivors, or something far more complex? The evidence from Goyet paints a picture of a people capable of both complex tool use and brutal, organized violence. It challenges us to look beyond simple labels and consider the harsh realities that may have shaped a world where other humans could be seen not just as rivals, but as prey. And it forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that the capacity for this kind of violence may be a deeply rooted part of our own evolutionary story too.